Chris Williamson, host of the Modern Wisdom podcast, recently released an episode talking about the top 15 things he's learned in over 800 podcasts and 36 years of life. And in classic internet fashion, I'm going to break those down into the ones I've found the most powerful and beneficial, and talk about how the average Joe like you and I can implement these tips into our lives. By the end of this video, you'll reflect on your potentially toxic views of productivity, know the importance of self-esteem in motivation, understand the role of self-reflection, and learn how to find like-minded people. I hope you enjoy, and feel free to subscribe and like and all that stuff. So this channel is all about learning and growing. I want to share my experiences and the lessons I'm learning on my path to not only success, but also becoming a better person. Now, of course, I'm not quite there. Unless you think living with your parents at age 24 is successful, then I'm absolutely smashing it. But it is something I think about a lot, and I think taking advice from these people who have made it is a really good and easy way to learn these lessons without having to go through those trials and tribulations yourself. And I've got to say, Chris Williamson is probably one of my favorite people to listen to. His way of articulating his thoughts and referencing stories from the past is an art form, and it's to be admired. Now, enough of the brown nosing. These are the top 4 pieces of advice from Chris Williamson to achieve success and happiness. Chris started off this podcast by talking about something called productivity debt. This is how he described it.
Many people seem to feel as if they start each day off in the morning with a kind of productivity debt, which they must struggle to pay off throughout the day in hopes of reaching a zero balance by the time the evening comes around.
This idea that we can only allow ourselves to feel good if we achieve something is something I'm battling with a lot at the moment. On the one hand, I want to maximize my productivity and take steps down this path towards success. But on the other hand, I also want to be able to stop and smell the roses sometimes. And I know that I'm working hard, but it also feels like I could always be working harder, if that makes sense. And this may be a toxic mentality, but I'm still trying to work out its place in my life. Of course, for my mood, it's not particularly great, but it does do wonders for my productivity. Plus, when I do push myself to my limits, I feel proud of myself. And that's an experience I think a lot of us fail to have these days. Chris's method to get over this was to write a done list. And I've noticed now that I've started writing down the things I've achieved in a day, I don't feel as much of an urge to push myself past my limits. And that's the issue with having motivation and a goal that you desperately want to achieve. You're always going to look to what's next instead of looking back to see what you've done. It's something that I'm working on, and hopefully this piece of advice is going to help me. The next thing that Chris spoke about that really stuck out to me was this idea of the power of low self-esteem.
And it's this same idea that I've been obsessed with for a long time, which is look at the very successful, very impressive people that you admire, that lots of people look up to, that we all hold in high esteem, and look at what the internal texture of their mind's like. Look at what the day-to-day existence for them feels like. And what does it mean? How driven to do amazing, great, fantastical things are they? And yet, in reality, do you want to be that person?
I've certainly noticed in myself and in others that low self-esteem can be a massive driver for success. However, as Chris has framed it before, it's a very potent fuel, but also a toxic one. Meaning that whilst it can get us a certain distance towards our success, is success truly success if we get no satisfaction from it? I said success way too many times there. Again, in my mind, I really love this concept, but how to put it into practice, I'm still trying to work out. Is it so wrong that we use our insecurities as fuels? I mean, we all have them, so is it not better to be successful with insecurities than unsuccessful with insecurities? I don't know. I would imagine kind of the best way to go about this is to work on both at the same time. To actively work on improving your self-esteem independent of external factors while also driving to achieve success. Really quick on the topic of self-esteem, I did recently make a video talking about where self-esteem comes from and how I found my confidence when I was at my lowest, so feel free to check that out. I'll leave a link at the end of this video. The next thing I learned from this podcast wasn't something Chris directly said, but it's something that I thought about after listening. At one point in the podcast, he was talking about these culture wars and this tendency of people to try and drag down and belittle the enemy.
All of our minds are held hostage by an endless cycle of shiny objects that aggravates both sides, and it makes them feel righteous for standing their ground. And yet, when you think about, in retrospect, how does it make you feel? It's neither entertaining, nor reassuring, nor meaningful. It's like none of the things that you should care about.
Now, of course, this is more prevalent than ever in the age of social media, this idea of dragging the enemy down for your own short-term gain. And it is something I've fallen victim to doing as well. I mean, as an English person, it feels like our default mode to complain about things we don't agree with.
Sometimes we need to complain, but how can we do this politely and in a British way?
But I realized listening to this podcast that there is a kind of high you experience on dragging someone else down, but normally that disappears pretty quickly. And this just made me think about the importance of self-reflection. Our habits and our natural reactions to things are easy to look past, but sometimes they may not be helpful. If we can constantly reflect on our good and our bad patterns, like our tendency to belittle someone to feel good for the moment, we can learn more about who we are compared to who we want to be. Then the last thing I wanted to speak about, and it was something Chris spoke about towards the end of the podcast, was finding the others.
There is no one that you can even begin to glimpse as deeply as you can glimpse yourself. And this causes us to believe that our own internal state is unique. It is so idiosyncratic and odd and different that nobody else would be able to understand, and that the things that we want to do are such huge outliers that we're going to be mocked or ostracized, or it's going to be strange, or it's going to shock people, especially when it comes to finding the others, the people that want to have interesting conversations, that want to connect over deep things, that don't just want to do the small talk, that want to go on an adventure, they want to say yes to new things. I think that so many more people want that than realize it. Or so many more people want that than you realize. They know it, but you don't.
If you're watching this, it's likely you have dreams and ambitions that you really want to achieve. But at times, at least for me, it feels like part of this ambition is a feeling of isolation. Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one working this hard, or thinking this much, or desperate to make something of myself that no one else could possibly understand. Now, of course, this is simply not true. However, because so many of us don't talk about who we are, what our dreams are, what we think about the world, so many of us feel isolated in our views. It's only until you reach out to someone and share these thoughts with them that you realize, hey, I'm not the only one who thinks like this. Now, of course, there will be those people who think you're an absolute delusional weirdo for having these dreams, but then did you really want them in your life anyway? I really like this idea, and it has sparked me to bring up more conversations about slightly more meaningful things in my life. See, if you're experiencing these thoughts, it's likely someone else is too. So be the one to bridge that gap and open up that conversation. This podcast was full of powerful and insightful advice. As this channel is focused on productivity and personal growth, I mostly spoke about these in this video, but there was so much more, so I would recommend you check it out. And also, if you did enjoy the video, feel free to subscribe. You don't have to, but it would be great. Just here is the link to the video talking about self-esteem and where I found my confidence, so feel free to check that out. And aside from that, I hope you enjoyed and have a lovely day. Bye bye.